Alright guys, so I know a couple of you guys were asking some questions about the movements of teeth and the arrows that Dr. Rice was drawing and talking about. So I'm going to go ahead and do a quick 10-15 minute review, maybe even shorter. Um, so I first want to start off by welcome. And you guys can see my screen and hopefully hear me. So let's start off with a couple of things that I want you guys to memorize. If we memorize these steps right here, doing these questions becomes actually pretty easy. I'm not gonna lie, it still obviously does take thinking and you do have to work it out, but once you memorize these steps, there's 4 steps with sub-steps to memorize, but the first one is the maxilla represents the true direction. So if the arrow is pointing to the right, that means that the mandible is going to the right. If it's going buccal, that means it's the working side. If it's going mesiolingual, it's the balancing side. Mesial is protrusive. Mesiobuccal is a combination of working and protrusive. And then for the mandibular, all those are just the opposite. So for instance, for the mandibular, mesial would be the working. Distal buccal would be the balancing. Distal would be protrusive. Distal lingual would be the combination of working and protrusive. So those are the 2 things that you have to memorize right off the bat. The third thing that is necessary to memorize is that the supporting cusp of the maxillary teeth and the mandibular teeth go in the proximal ridges of their counterpart. I know it might not make sense right now, but once I show you guys an example, it will make sense. And the exceptions to those rule are the mesiolingual on the maxillary teeth. Sorry about that. The mesiolingual on the maxillary teeth are going central fossa, and the distal buccal on the mandibular teeth go in central fossa. Again, we'll go over an example of that, and hopefully it'll make more sense. And the fourth thing that we need to just remember is that in centric occlusion, only the supporting cusps contact. And the supporting cusps on the maxillary are the lingual, and the supporting cusps on the mandibular are the buccal. So that means if we have a maxillary diagram of, some maxillary molars and premolars, we're automatically thinking that the teeth that are going to contact those are going to be mandibular teeth, and we automatically know that they're going to be buccal cusps. So that's pretty much the 4 steps, the 4 little rules that I want you guys to memorize. I'm going to leave them right over here. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to explain what some of them mean. Hopefully you guys can see this. I can zoom in a little bit. So the first thing we're going over is, number 1, you have to identify what side of the mouth you're on. So right here we have obviously maxillary teeth, a bunch of different ways you can tell. I personally like looking at the premolars. This premolar you can clearly tell is going to be a maxillary premolar. If we go ahead and we look at the mandibular premolar right down here, you can clearly tell that that's completely different than that, and this is completely different than this. It's a dead giveaway. I mean, also this cusp on the mandibular is going to be a 5th one in this general area. So anyway, back to what side of the mouth we're on. This is clearly a maxillary, clearly the maxillary arch, and if we try to figure out what side it's on, it's clearly the maxillary right. Take a look at this mandibular, it's clearly the mandibular right as well. So when I was saying in some of the rules to memorize, it's going to be, the maxillary represents the true. You always have to remember that when we're talking, we're discussing a cusp is drawing an arrow. That's the way you have to think about it. So remember, your maxillary teeth don't move. So for this instance, we have a maxillary teeth on the right side, and if we drag our mandible to the right, I know that it might be a little difficult to envision this, but go ahead and drag your mandible to your right. You'll notice that on this side, right here, one of your cusps will draw this arrow. And the way that your mandible moves is always the working side. So, I mean, it's a little bit, redundant when you actually think about it, but that's the way it is. And then it's the exact opposite when we go down to the mandibular side. On the mandibular side, the cusps that are going to be drawing this arrow in here are going to be your maxillary cusp. That's why it's the opposite. I know it gets a little confusing, but if you go ahead and you think about it, you do that same motion where you pull your mandible to the right, the arrow will be going to the left because the maxillary arch is what's drawing the arrow. So that's where we get the working side of both, because again, the working side is the way the mandible is moving. The protrusive for the maxillary, think about it. If you protrude your mandible out, they will draw on your maxillary teeth a line that goes to the mesial, that goes out. However, if you're talking about your mandibular arch, if you protrude your mouth out, you're talking about a line that won't go forward, it'll go backward because it's being drawn by the maxillary teeth. The best way to think about this is kind of like moving two objects in different directions, but keeping one of them the same and pulling the other back and forth. So that's basically how you do decide between working, balancing, and protrusive. We're going to go over examples probably within the last 5 minutes of this video. This video will be approximately 15 minutes long. This is just some balancing movements, some protrusive movements. I mean, I really not going to sit here and like go over which way is balancing, which way is protrusive. It's the exact same thing as was shown up here, just with a bunch of different arrows. Again, you have to remember that the mesiolingual on the maxillary teeth is balancing, and then that becomes natural. And then just don't even remember the mandibular teeth, because it's just the opposite. For instance, the opposite of mesiolingual is distal buccal. Opposite of mesio is distal, opposite of lingual is buccal. So therefore, the distal buccal is going to be the balancing movement on the mandibular teeth. For protrusive, again, maxillary teeth go forward, they point the right way, and mandibular teeth will point opposite. Something that gets a little bit confusing, but it's not really too confusing as long as it's just a straight point of memorization, is going to be a combination movement. A combination movement is a combination of working and protrusive. Again, that's right here in our rules. So if you go ahead and you look at the combination movement of this one, combination is always mesio-buccal. What that means is that there's a combination between the protrusive, which would be going mesial, and the working, which would be going buccal. So that's why it's a combination between the working and the protrusive. I don't know if you guys can actually see this line that I'm drawing, but there's a line going right here, and a line would be going here. On the opposite, it would be the line that goes back, which we know on mandibular is protrusive, and the line that goes lingual, which would be on the mandibular, would be the working side. So this would be working, and this would be working protrusive for both of these. And now where everyone seems to be getting a little bit confused upon is what cusp is going where. It's not too confusing. There's two things besides those rules that I told you to memorize. I always draw this. Before you start the quiz tomorrow, draw one of these things. It takes about, 10 seconds. You don't even have to draw both sides. Draw one side. Let's see if I can mark this up for you guys. Draw one side, so I would draw just this whole side over here. Yeah, I know that's a terrible circle. I would draw this whole side over here, and it's really easy. You want to start off by drawing 8 boxes on top and 8 boxes on the bottom. Just make sure that your 8 boxes on the bottom are going to be split in between every box. This basically will tell you what has actually happened, like where the teeth contact, and I mean it's a really good way to understand it. So again, you draw the 8 on top right here and draw the 8 on the bottom, and just remember that when you first start your 8 on the bottom, just draw starting from in between each of your top boxes, and you will get the correct alignment of the teeth. So draw this and remember your rules, and you will be set for the exam, quiz, whatever you want to call it. I don't really care. I'm having a little trouble erasing these. And you will be set for the quiz tomorrow. So we have 5 minutes left in this video, and I'm going to go over some questions for you guys. Let's go over this question real quick. I know the answers are there, but it doesn't make a difference. So the question is, assuming the occlusion and alignment are normal, the arrow on the illustration below represents the path taken by which cusp of a second molar? So there's two things. Number one, we know that this is going to be a mandibular arch. This is a left mandibular arch as well. So we know that the cusp for the maxillary, there's only certain cusps that can, let me pull up my rules for you guys. Nope, let's see if I can find them for you. Hold on, guys, bear with me. Yep, well, now I got rid of that. All right, here we go. So here are your rules to memorize. So we know that on the maxillary cusp, what we have is the maxillary cusp, the only ones that are the supporting cusp are going to be a lingual. So right off the bat, you can take off facial. So you can take out two of these right off the bat. You also know, according to our rules, that the mesial lingual on the maxillary should be an essential fossa. Is this an essential fossa? No, it's not an essential fossa. So that means we already know it's the distal lingual cusp. Could it be the cusp of Carabelli? It could be, but it wouldn't be because the cusp of actually couldn't be, because the cusp of Carabelli is not a supporting cusp. So that question's done relatively quickly, relatively easily as well. This next question, assuming the occlusion and alignment are normal, the arrow in the illustration below represents the path taken by the arrow on the sketch. Whatever that means, we want to know what's going here, and we just want to know what's going there. So for this question, I would definitely use my little drawing. So let's see if I can bring him back over nice and slowly. All right, so let's see what we got. So we are on a mandibular left side. Is this the mandibular side? Nope, this is the maxillary side. Sorry, see the cusp of Carabelli right here? So this is the maxillary right side. So if we're on the maxillary right side, we're in between the first and second premolars. So let's go ahead and take a look. We have our maxillary right side. Doesn't matter really where you are, but you're in between your first and second premolar. So we already know it's going to be a second premolar. Let's see. D, we have second premolar. Now, is it your facial cusp or is it your lingual cusp of your second premolar? Based upon the fact that maxillary are going to be, yeah, I don't know. That's a little tricky question because we don't know the difference between the facial and the lingual cusp of the second premolar. I don't think she would ask that, but I'm glad we wasted time doing that. I'll ask her tomorrow on that and clarify for everyone. The arrow opposing illustration below represents a path taken by the opposing contact cusp. The mandibular movement indicated is. So now remember, we're talking about mandibular movement here, so don't get confused, but this is a maxillary right side. So if it's a maxillary right side and your mandible is, and they're drawing the mandible to the mandible movement to your left, if that makes sense. This is the maxillary right side, and it's drawn. Hey guys, so I don't know if you guys missed anything, but this is the next question we're on, and it's going to do it real quick. So read the question. This is the maxillary right side. The arrows are going to the left if you think about it, if you put this up in your mouth the right way. So what happens is that you have a left lateral motion, and since they're not going to the buccal, it's going to be the non-working side. Okay, so for the next question, we're going to have something very similar. It's going to be what is going on here. We know we're on the mandibular side. We're on the mandibular left side, and we have it here. It's not an essential fossa, so it's not going to be mesiolingual. It's not going to be mesio anything, matter of fact. So you can take all those out. And we know it's going to be distal lingual because that's what occludes on the mandibular side. So maxillary distal lingual of the second molar will occlude. That's why D is correct. So this is a very straightforward question. They give us a mandibular first molar, saying which way is this arrow going and what does it mean to us. Basically, you have to remember that this arrow is going to the left. So if it's going to the lingual, it's the opposite of this, so that would be the working side. That's why A is correct in here. Again, remember your rules and it becomes a lot easier. Alright guys, and here's the last question. I'm going to try to explain as fast as possible because I only got 30 seconds before my time runs out. It's question number 2. The mandibular movement indicated in the drawing above is which way? Think about it, you have maxillary, the maxillary pointing to the right. So what that means is that you're going to have a right lateral and you're on the working side because that's the side that the mandible is moving towards. You're already on that side. I hope this video was helpful. you have any questions, post them on Facebook. I'll see you guys tomorrow.